This week's tip is about how to use alternating skeins, and I looked in my stash and I found this. If you notice, these are both Madeline Tosh Prairie Tart, and they are distinctly different colors. Now, when you buy yarn, hand-dyed yarn like this, it's a good thing to do is buy it all from one source at the same time. You stand a much better chance that it's going to be dyed in the same batch. But if you have two that are clearly not the same, you can use a variety of methods of alternating skeins. Or, depending on the project. I have been known, if it's something like a scarf, just start using the other one. When it's wrapped and worn around your neck, the way the light plays on it, it's not that big of a deal. But should you want to alternate it, there's a couple of ways to do it. Now, the most common way is to work 2 rows in one color, 2 rows, 2 rows, 2 rows, and then carry the yarn up the side. And that is going to make that side fatter. If it's encased in a seam, it's not that big of a deal. And if I were seaming this to another piece that had been knit the same way, it would not have the yarn carried up, so it would be consistent. I'd have yarn carried up, and then the next piece would be not carried up and then carried up on that side. So it would even out. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. Now, if you're doing something like a scarf where you're not going to be seaming it, well, it depends on the stitch pattern. It can be a problem. Now, one thing you can do is this technique for single rows. And of course, it would depend on the stitch pattern and how comfortable you are doing things like cables or yarn overs on the wrong side, or decreases or whatever. If you're comfortable doing that, then this is a good technique to use. And because it does not leave any yarn that's been carried up. And how it works is, I go ahead and I've got white here, so I'm going to be doing the blue. I work the blue, I knit, and normally what would I do at the end of this row? I'd turn. But, and that's the other thing, when you carry that yarn out, make sure you don't strand it too tightly or it pulls that edge up. But instead of turning to work the blue, I'm going to knit the white over. And you can see that if this were a stitch pattern where in the blue I was making decreases and yarn overs, this would be my plain row. It's an alternating row. So I've got blue and white. Then I turn and I use the blue to purl. Now the problem would be, this would be considered in most charts and patterns a right side row. So if I had decreases or yarn overs or something of that sort, I would have to familiarize myself with the purl version of that, or cables. And I've done some blog entries on things like this, so you can look them up. It's not that hard, it just requires a lot more thought. And here I go, I'm going to use my white and purl over. So I knit 2 rows, I purl 2 rows, knit 2 rows, purl 2 rows, and then I'm good to go. Again, that method, if you're using it in something other than stockinette or garter or some simple stitch pattern, it is going to require some thought on your part. Now, if you don't do that method, then you're going to do the other method where you work 2 rows in the one color, and then you work, I'm going to turn, work another row in this color, and then when I get to the other side, I'll use the other color, and I am going to be carrying that yarn up the side. Ignore that. That is my my phone is ringing and I'm not going to answer it. And now I would be carrying up my blue and so on. Now, if worse comes to worse, we'll wait until this is over. Prince song. Okay. Worst comes to worst, you can always cut the yarn and then you're going to have a million yarn tails to come into. Now, as I said, what I try and do when I'm dealing with hand-dyed yarns is I try and get them from the same site and find out from the yarn shop owner if they've been dyed at the same, if they got them at the same time. Now my other phone is ringing. Ignore it. And if that is not the case, then I would use this technique. But I have found that, unlike this two cases of the tart where it is so different that, oh God. Okay, there we go. That often it doesn't matter. If it's slightly off, use it on another sleeve. And the way that light falls on garments, it may not be that noticeable. And some stitch patterns aren't as prone to it. But if you have a clear difference like these two tarts, you are going to have to do something. Now, what I have done before is use a technique like this for several inches and then transitioned over to the other yarn. If you have a yarn where there is some color variation in it, you may want to consider doing this if you're getting a pooling effect. And this is a way you can break up the pooling effect as well.